Madlab Performance presents The Lab Podcast. Here's your host and chief mad scientist, Dan Gilbert.
Hello and welcome everybody to The Lab. I'm joined in studio with Luke Hillman, often imitated but never, ever duplicated.
As always.
And we have a special guest in studio as well. Calling in from home, like a true hero. Josh Kruhm, top-tier coach, educational director for Madlab. Josh?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Today, we're going to be talking about athletic training. This is something that I see, another thing that I see messed up and often confused in the industry. Would you agree with me there, Josh?
Oh, absolutely.
So we're going to go over some things that we see that probably need to be corrected, and then some ways that we should be thinking about programming for our athletes and really what we should be focusing on. Josh, you've seen a lot of things. You trained a lot of years. You've trained a ton of different athletes, from hockey players to soccer players, lacrosse, baseball, you name it. Josh has trained it. What are some things that you've seen really most interestingly, what are some pet peeves that you have with athletic training?
I mean, one of the biggest issues right off the bat is just the idea of trying to make training sport specific, when as trainers, it's not our job to be sport specific. It's their sport coach's job to make their training sport specific, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So
our listeners can really figure this out, because I know what you're talking
absolutely.
about.
So say you have some ex-athlete who's now training athletes of the sport he played, and you have that guy take a bunch of kids and they go through a bunch of drills and things like that they may not necessarily do on the field, but it looks cool and the kids like it, and he or she has made it up in their mind that that's what's going to help get that kid better.
My favorite one of these is the ladder drills, especially for football players.
Go-to.
And stuff.
That's the go-to, baby.
Yeah, and they're on the ladders for like an hour straight, and it's just like, well,
I was a victim of that.
You were actually a victim. I remember you talking about that. So then they're like on the ladder for an hour, going back and forth, and a lot of times when they're training, these teams are in a line, and then they're waiting in line to go through this ladder and moves that they necessarily will never make, and also are all predetermined, right? So they know what they're supposed to be doing. So it's good to work on footwork and stuff, but that, again, they're not really working on some of the things that they should be working on. Is that a good example? Yeah,
I mean, a really good example is when you have a college or even a professional athlete. Kind of my rule of thumb is if they're doing something in a drill or something like that their coach for college or professional isn't having them do, maybe that's kind of where you start getting out of that gray area.
Yeah, and then you have some of these people that have some movement limitations, and your time would be better spent on fixing some of those movement limitations. If I have a kid that can't safely decelerate on a one-legged hop with his own body weight and can't squat very well, then why do I have him doing all of these super advanced movements, right?
Exactly. I mean, you're building the foundation, especially with a lot of the kids we get that are middle school, high school, early high school kids. It's not about getting them a D1 scholarship the next day. It's about making sure that they can be on the field, making sure that they can play to the best of their ability and stay healthy, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's another big thing is injury prevention, right? The best ability is availability. And I know, Luke, this is something that you're super passionate about, and you've had some issues with some kids coming to you.
All of them.
Yeah, that have had some supreme problems. A lot of baseball players, a lot of shoulders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they're doing a ton of shoulder dominant movements.
They say they bench press all the time.
Oh, baseball's the worst with it.
Yeah, they bench press all the time.
Yeah, I don't know why.
They told me that just yesterday.
Josh, what do you think about the bench press as being a staple for programming for baseball?
I mean, know if it should necessarily be a staple for really any high level athletic performance.
Exactly.
You're saying
let
that
alone-
me
especially let
pushing
alone baseball.
upwards from a bench isn't like the most athletic thing I could do?
I mean, don't get me wrong; it should be a part of anything, but especially for a baseball player, I would more go towards like a Swiss grip type bench if you're going to do it, or a dumbbell.
Can you explain that
spend
Swiss
so much
grip,
time-
Swiss grip to our listeners?
Yeah, so it allows you. It's a Swiss grip bar, so it allows you to kind of change where your grip is, whether that's angled and a little in, or maybe even all the way to neutral.
Okay.
And that's just going to be a lot healthier for the shoulder than pronated or whatever weird variation some coach comes up with.
Yeah,
Right.
and to that, if I do any type of pressing, it's always neutral grip with those guys.
Right,
Whether
because
it's
I mean they're pretty much baseball players, especially ones that have to throw a lot, like your pitchers, catchers, outfielders. Because they're throwing so much, they're just getting so much internal rotation already, and then to work on something that has an element of internal rotation or works specific muscles that internally rotate. And when we're talking about internal rotation, we're talking about like the upper arm bone, the humerus. So if they're already working on a lot of muscles that internally rotate that, and they're doing a movement where they're ballistically internally rotating that, then you kind of want to do a lot of the opposite in your programming. Is that safe to say, gentlemen?
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with baseball players, I think they get babied a little bit too much. But I will say, especially now with youth programs, they're playing year round, so it's hard not to baby their shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. So they're playing, a lot of them I see are playing 12 months out of the year, and that seems a little, obviously we don't have control in all of that. But if it were up to you and you had control of, let's use the most extreme example, so a pitcher, right? This person is starter, number one in the rotation, so they're pitching a lot. How many months out of the year would you have this? Let's say it's an eighth grader, right? How many months out of the year would you have them play? Like if you actually could have control of it, what would be ideal?
I mean, if you're talking about a middle school, early high school kid, I'd say probably you want them to pitch their season, maybe do some summer ball, and then after that, it should be very light, more strength focused, more form focused, things like that. And then getting them ready for the next season. I hate seeing kids now throwing year round. And then the parents wonder why they get up to senior year in high school and their arm dies.
You're starting to have kids that are 15, 16 years old having Tommy John surgery.
Well, the demand for games has gone up in a lot of these sports.
Yeah.
And
A perfect example, I went to a high school with a kid that was, as a sophomore, junior in high school, was getting scouted by the Royals and Angels and a couple other teams. They were routinely at our high school games. And the kid was throwing 93, 94 miles an hour. And the baseball coach told him after summer ball, hey, take off until next spring. Save your arm, take off till next spring.
Oh,
Kid decides to play in the fall. Yeah. Kid decides to play in the fall.
That's not so smart.
And winter comes around, kid gets what's called dead arm.
Yeah.
Velocity's not there. All of a sudden, that 94 mile an hour fastball is not an 87 mile an hour fastball.
And that is a
No
significant
scouts
difference.
are beating down the door. Yeah. No scouts are beating down the door for a high school kid that throws 87.
Dang.
So, I mean, it derailed a lot of his career.
And that's
'Cause he ended
preventable.
up not being able to pit. Exactly. Like, it's just rest.
And to me, our biggest job as trainers is, can we keep that athlete on the field, on the court, in the ring, on the ice? Like, how can we keep them there?
well, that's what Josh was saying too.
Yeah.
I think earlier, it's not about getting them ready for the pros. It's about just getting them available and better, like at where they're at currently.
Right.
Because they have to be able to, no matter where they want to go, there's still levels they have to be at. So as that level coach, you need to have them dominate where they're at now to get them ready for that next stage, not shoot it all the way to the pros.
Right.
You know
And
what I mean?
that, I mean,
Right.
that
So what's
kid-
the problem with that 12-month is what other sports are they playing during that time?
Yeah.
Are they just specifically playing baseball? Because that's even worse. Or are you playing baseball, football, lacrosse, running track, swimming, playing basketball? Are you doing one of those things with it?
There's been some big studies fairly recently on athletes, on showing that athletes should be doing more than one sport through high school. Is that something that you would agree with, Josh? Do you know anything about? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Look at the Super Bowl MVP from last week. Was a high-level high school baseball player, got drafted by the Tigers, and went on to win a Super Bowl MVP.
So there was also a terrible joke made about that too. I don't know if
you're welcome. I thought immediately of you when I heard that.
Yeah, can you tell it for the listeners, despite it being at my expense?
So Dan is a Lions fan.
Big Detroit Lions fan for no reason at all, I guess. It's just a genetic disease. My dad's from Detroit.
And so when Mahomes being drafted by the Tigers, I saw a joke that said, "Oh, finally Detroit drafted a Super Bowl winning quarterback."
It's pretty good.
Yeah. It's a little messed up, but so I think that the multiple sports are important. Like how much one athlete really, it comes down to the same reason anybody gets hurt in anything, right? Is same movements over and over again. It causes an imbalance. It causes overuse on specific joints, and then somebody gets injured.
I feel like a lot of our young athletes are always hurt from something. There's too many injuries happening, and people are too comfortable with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like 100%. It's just like, oh, it's just the way it is. I really don't think it's just the way it is.
No, it's not. And then you assess them.
Don't you get that vibe?
Yes, 100%. We assess them, and then we see these movement limitations. Or like, well, why is this not been corrected? Or, and I understand, people just don't know, but it is a thing that more and more people should become aware of. There are certain ways that we want our athletes to move, right? If somebody comes to you, like Josh, what are some things that you look for in just a normal young athlete that you want them to be able to do? Like, assuming just a fairly normal sport that you train. So whether it be like soccer, or lacrosse, or basketball, or something like that. Like, what are some things that you look for that you're like, I really want a kid to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and then I know that they're pretty much, without anything else going on, in a good spot.
Absolutely, yeah. So I need a kid to be able to squat. I need him to be able to hinge effectively, of course, not the high school football hinge.
We were just talking about that, but sorry, continue. Yeah.
I want them to be able to single leg hop well. I don't want to see them change. I really want to see them change direction and jump without any valgus in the knee.
Can we go on a little bit of a tangent on this? Just 'cause, that's how I think anyway.
The relentless box jumps.
Well, that's
45 minutes of jumping on the box.
I think we should go into all of that stuff, right? So,
that's how you jump higher. You just keep trying to do it.
So that drives me crazy. So when people don't know what they're working on, right? So when people are like, "Oh, I do speed, agility, and quickness training," right? I am getting people to jump higher by having them box jump 40 million times. Oh, what are you working on here? I'm working on power because we're doing power cleans for 80 repetitions in a given workout, right? Which is not really that much of an exaggeration. Can you go into some of the specifics of that, Josh? Like some of the things that you see with that, like for example, if somebody's working on power, what should they be working on versus what you see happen a lot where people get confused? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Worded that in a strange way.
Yeah, I want to see a kid be able to create power in every direction, right? Because that's what sports is. Almost no matter what sport you play, you want to be able to create power in any direction.
Absolutely.
So that's a big thing I want to see. So if somebody's just all they're doing for power is squat jumps and box jumps, right?
Right.
That's one plane of motion. I want to see a kid be able to maybe do a rotational box jump or a hurdle hop or lateral hop, something that he or she's having to change direction, right? They're having to change direction. They're having to produce power in a variety of different ways.
Right. And if you're teaching a skill, or you're working on some kind of conditioning, then you're kind of higher rep, more volume, right? But if you're working on just power, why are you programming 30 or 40 repetitions of this given movement?
Right. And it's the idea of, I think a lot of people think of it as like endurance from that standpoint, but power endurance can be done right. Power, they're like, all right, I need to get this kid conditioned. I need him to be able to jump in the fourth quarter.
Which is important.
Which is right.
But now you're not working on
better way
power.
to do it than a million different, right. It's a little bit different. It's power endurance.
Right.
Which is be able to ability to create power later in games. But it's still not going to be maximal power. There's a very big difference.
Can you take us through too? So we have the power confusion, but I also think that there's large confusion in agility versus change of direction, right?
Right.
Can you take us through that?
Agility is a reaction to a stimulus, right? So agility isn't doing
distinction.
Right. So agility is not necessarily doing a whole bunch of ladder drills. I think that's what that gets confused with. That's footwork, doing things around cones. Agility comes from having to react to a stimulus. So I used to train a lot of hockey players. High degree of agility demand in that sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what you do, you have them do movements, you throw tennis balls at them, you have them react to a clap, you have them react to an audio command. You have them react to a visual command, something that makes them think as they are moving. So
like, I feel like the difference is if I have Luke run up to a cone and I'm like, all right, Luke, you're going to, as soon as you run up to this cone, you're going to change direction left, you're going to go left, and then you're going to go to the next cone, and then you're going to go right? And if I have him do that, he is working on change of direction, just specifically change of direction. If I have him run up to a given cone and at the last second I point a different way and he has to react to which way I'm pointing and he doesn't know, now he's working on agility because I now have given him a stimulus that he has to react to and not one that he is predetermined and that he knows before he goes to change direction, right?
Yeah, the best part of that is you're working on both at that point.
Yes. Yeah,
right? You're working on change of direction mechanics, but you're working at them at a high rate and a high reaction rate.
And please, if you have your athletes, so anybody that's listening to this, if you have your athletes change direction, or if you are an athlete and you're working on, and you want to work on agility, work on just change of direction without a stimulus first, and get your angles down, slow it down. You should be able to get proper shin angles, so your shin angle and your torso should be pretty much parallel. When you're changing direction, you should be able to push off on the right part of your foot. You should be able to decelerate your body weight and then reaccelerate in a smooth manner. Once you can do that, then start adding a stimulus and making it more and more difficult. Right? Is that was kind of what you're talking about, Josh?
Yeah. So the progression I go through with this is I always start with single instance movements. So that's a single leg hop in a certain direction. Right, single leg hop, or like a single movement in a certain direction, whether I'm turning in a cone to go to another cone. It happens one time. I can control and break down just that little movement. From there, I move into kind of a multiple instance type movement. So whether that's going from one cone to another, that can also include changing what type of movement you're doing, whether that's a shuffle or a crossover step into a sprint, vice versa. And then from there, you move to reaction. So everything kind of builds. So those mechanics are built by the time you get to reaction.
See, I think that's important to have progressions like that. Another thing that I see messed up a lot, Luke and I were talking about this before. We were talking about kids playing a sport where parents and coaches want them to be fast, right? Speed is important, right?
Speed kills, right?
Yeah, that's what they say. So then I think the expectation is a lot of times that to be faster, they need to run a lot. Once again, we need to talk about, the difference between conditioning and power and stuff. So, we've kind of already gone over some of that, but it needs to be reiterated on this. But then also, if their mechanics are not sound when they sprint, then we're not going to have them sprint, especially in volume. Can you take us through the progression start like elementary. When let's say you get that 8th grader in, he plays soccer. You take a look at his running form. It's has those choppy steps. Long ground contact time. Arms are kind of all over the place. How do you break down the sprint? Where do you start your progressions, and then where do you want to take those progressions to?
Yeah, so you definitely want to segment everything. So what I mean by that, you're going to take one of the issues that you talked about. So soccer player is going to be knee drive. It's always an issue with soccer players. Unless they run track as well, always an issue with soccer players, that knee drive.
Right.
So you're going to put them against a wall. You do wall drills. You're going to have them march. You want to put them in positions where they have to imitate that.
Right.
Under tension, without tension.
In an easier manner. So like when you're on wall drills,
Right.
You don't have to use as much of core. You're obviously using no arm movement. So it's much more elementary, and it's easier for them to start to control their movement.
Right. You want to take that movement. You want to put them possibly with a little bit of resistance, like a light sled or something like that, where they can get into a deeper angle and actually move with it.
That's a really good point as well.
Because the issue with kind of wall drills, you don't actually go anywhere, right?
Right.
Unless you have a really weak wall, you're not going anywhere.
Which is good at first, but we do want to take them from that.
And a lot of times kids can understand things a little bit more from that standpoint when they get to move with it.
Absolutely.
So when they actually get to go through the movement that you're wanting them to do.
So you would take somebody wall drills, with their hands on a wall, working on that knee drive, that triple extension. And then you're also at the same time, when you're teaching them that, you're putting them on a sled so they can see it in a movement pattern, but still have their weight supported onto the sled.
Right. I want to do something that's a very light sled, or even a sled that's kind of banded back towards like behind them. Just something that they can move a little bit and have some tension, but they actually get to create that angle without being against a wall.
Okay, that makes sense. And then where would you take them from there?
From there, kind of at the same time, you're going to work on that ground contact time, which is going to be a big issue as well, because now you're taking that knee drive. And a lot of times when you take a kid that is used to short, choppy steps, you throw in some knee drive, now it's slow.
Right.
So you took that,
right.
You took that choppy step that they might have actually been pretty efficient with, and you move that knee up. And the problem is, if you don't do anything with that, a lot of times they slow down a good bit, and then the kid gets frustrated.
Yeah,
so you want to try to incorporate, So you want to incorporate some light plyometrics into that to work on the ground contact time. So that could be things like bunny hops, little light hurdle hops. You could get out the ladder, hop through the squares. That can be double leg, single leg. You want them just to get the feel of what that ground contact time is supposed to be like.
Instead of them running with their foot on the ground so long. Ground contact time is how long your foot spends on the ground. For our listeners, obviously, the better your ground contact time, so the quicker, the less time that your foot spends on the ground, obviously the faster you're going to be. And then when we talk about that knee drive, that helps you get stride length. So the most direct way to get faster is to improve stride length and ground contact time. That's kind of what Josh is going into. Continue, Josh. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. So the tricky part then becomes, how do we turn that into sport, right? Because we can do all we want on a little turf track.
Well, that's what I was going.
Right?
That's actually something I wanted to say is the application of this, because a lot of people, we can talk about this, but a lot of people don't get, well, how is this going to help me? How is this going to help my son or daughter in whatever sport? I mean, for instance, like when I look at like basketball, like when Josh talking about reacting and application, Josh could say this. How many times have you seen guys that kill it in a drill, but then when you go into a game, you have to react and you work on that, like this application of these things, they can't react. So then it
looks like they're running through the snow. Yeah, it
looks like they're running through the snow. It looks like almost like a robot, because they don't have that. Like he was talking about. What were we talking about? that
ground contact time.
no, not just that reactive ability.
Oh, okay.
Like
Yeah.
reaction with changing
Right.
direction.
Yeah, they can't react to the stimulus.
Yeah.
And then they are kind of bogged
So
down.
it's important that they do this because it could not be a skills thing holding them back. It can be literally just a movement thing holding them back.
Absolutely. I think that another big thing that drives me nuts about athletic training is people try to get their athletes to be so good in their turf space or in their weight room, and they forget that the main goal is to be able to translate whatever that you do in the weight room or on the turf or whatever you're doing. It has to go into their sport. If it does not translate to their sport, then you have failed as a trainer, right?
Yeah, I always tell people the Joe DeFranco story. He basically trained people out of a closet, and he trained high school All-Americans, and he trained at one point the entire New York Giants offensive line back when they were good out of basically like a giant broom closet. So, I mean, it's not...
Bring back that
you can
broom
have all the
closet.
turf and you can have all that fancy equipment and turf and all that stuff you want, but you can get those effects that you want with just smart programming and smart cueing.
Absolutely, because improving movement can be fairly simplistic, right? And it's got to translate.
Yeah, I mean, like what we were talking about, taking that a step forward, then you start to add in a little bit of light reaction. So kind of going back to the single instance, multiple instance, you kind of incorporate reaction into that as well. So you kind of go backwards a little bit. So whether that's a kid doing sprints and they're doing like almost like a red light, green light type thing, or you're doing the ball drop drill, which is you stand 3-4 yards away from them, maybe less, depending on how
I love
fast
watching
the kid
that
is.
drill.
You drop the ball from about shoulder height, and they have to get it before it takes a second bounce. Right? That's a great drill to teach kids how to apply those things that they just learned. They're learning how to accelerate, and now you're putting it into terms that they understand, which is, I have to go get that ball.
Right. I think the important thing, again, is that you're breaking everything down, and then you're building it back up to more and more advanced concepts. And then the athlete that you have in front of you after a certain amount of time should be very improved when going through that process. Where does when you're talking about trying to get somebody faster and you're talking about the progressions, where does skipping come in?
So skipping to me comes once they have that wall drilled down.
Okay.
Once they have that wall drilled down, or towards it's in sight. So you start to have that wall drill in sight where they can create a lot of force into the ground. That ground contact time is nice and quick. That knee drive is really nice. All right, now you're going to start to look at skipping, because then you're going back to ground contact time.
What about teaching
you're going to angles?
Dan Gilbert how to skip?
That takes a little too long.
Not any longer than teaching Luke Hillman how to skip.
I don't remember remember teaching you that.
I think
Luke, you didn't take that long.
Really?
I was terrible.
I don't know, man. I thought Josh was gonna have a stroke trying to teach me.
You didn't see me, and mine was even worse because it was on a huge field in front of a ton of people.
Yeah.
So there's like people like
I felt like the biggest goof when he was teaching me. I was like, I literally felt like I had no control of my body. He's like, do this. It looks so simple, and it was just translating it. I felt like such a.
That's how I felt.
Okay.
I thought I was a really good athlete until Josh told me to laterally skip.
Yeah, until he ripped you apart.
Dan, in your defense, you didn't have an ACL in your one knee at the time.
Yeah, well, I did.
Fair.
I did.
Fair. Thank you, Josh. Thank you. I appreciate that. For sure. What about in season versus off season training? Because that's something that again, that's something that gets very confused and kind of builds off of our last podcast when we talk about like some of that. Yeah, overtraining kind of comes into it for sure. Take us through that a little bit, Joshua Kruhm.
Yeah, so it differs a little bit depending on kind of what age group you're working with. So middle school kids, you're usually practicing 2-3 times a week. It's a lot less of a concern at that point.
Right.
Because at that point, you're actually trying to build them up for higher level competition. So you still want to monitor how they perform. I'll get into this a little bit later, but one of my issues with kids, especially middle school kids, is you see them maybe once or twice a week and you have no idea what they're doing the rest of the week.
That it becomes a big, again, that's why we keep reiterating this through our, from the different podcasts that we've done, but you hear us talk about feedback constantly. You need to get feedback from your clients. You need to figure out what they're doing at home or at school or in their other sports or in their other activities. And then, unfortunately, you kind of have to program around that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest tricks of training middle school, high school athletes is you have so little control over their day-to-day life. I mean, if you think about it, if you have them twice a week for about an hour each time, there's 2 hours of their entire
control
week.
over a middle school's day-to-day life, even parents.
I mean, you're seeing them for 2 hours out of an entire week, right? Most practices go about 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours. So if they practice 2-3 times a week, their coach is seeing them probably double what they're seeing you. Just to put that in perspective, just the amount of hours in a month, you see them 8 hours.
You have to figure out what that coach is doing with them. If they're doing heavy conditioning constantly with them and they have them, 4 or 5 days a week, maybe your job is not best spent on heavy conditioning in your sessions. And I think people don't think about that. Work on more mobility, work on more
when you're in season, why would you work on conditioning? Like if I'm a basketball player, I got enough conditioning going on.
Right.
Like the training sessions, I know, I'm just saying like.
Yeah, you play multiple games a week,
The training sessions are best served for like mobility, movement things than they would be for any sort of conditioning. I think at that point, it's like an ego thing.
Right.
So yeah, when you start moving up
I'm so tired.
I mean, when you start moving up to high school, it's more about maintenance.
Yeah.
Because they're practicing 5 days a week. So you're trying to make sure that all that hard work that kid put in over the course of, say it's a football player, all that work they've been putting in since winter.
But that
is not completely thrown out the window by the time playoff time comes around for them.
But I want to go back to something that Luke just said, because I do think that is a big problem in our industry, is that somebody comes to a session.
Oh, yeah.
Your job is to murder them and make them exhausted when they walk out. Again, if it's a high school kid playing 4 or 5 games a week, Luke, right?
And it's not even like they're murdering them in a smart way.
Right.
As funny as that sounds.
Right.
But it's like a bench press, ridiculous. Push-ups with horrific form, and it's allowed. No correcting on that.
Right.
And then I get to see them the next
any
day.
idiot can make somebody tired.
This is Luke is talking about a specific experience.
Yeah. And then they can come in the next day complaining that they're super sore and can barely get through a workout.
Right.
And then I have to deal with that.
Yeah. But that's what makes you good, right? So you have to be able to switch the session up. You need to be able to program based on what that athlete is doing,
And
whether
the thing
it's
is,
the
too,
games
you don't
they
want to
play.
offend anybody. So you can't offend the coaches. You have to.
Yeah, you can't say anything.
You can't say anything.
Yeah.
You cannot. You have to work within that, and that is part of it.
Yeah, you can't be like.
You can only roll your eyes a couple times.
Yeah.
Right. And honestly, in a lot of coaches' defense, they're just trying to help their kids out in the best way they know how.
Yeah.
And they just don't, a lot of them just don't know. And a lot of coaches have multiple things going on. They coach at least one sport. A lot of times they're teaching on top of it. A lot of times they have their own kids. Then they're also trying to be in charge of a weight room or the team workouts or whatever. So they're just, and some of it's just not paid. They're just volunteering their time. So I do understand, but it does get frustrating to work against.
We can't get lucky like some of the coaches we work with, and they recognize what they need and what they're missing in their program.
Absolutely. Now, we've been very lucky to work with some very smart, progressive coaches where they're just like, we know that our athletes need some mobility. They need to be able to move better. We need to be smarter with their in-season volume. We want them to be available to be on the field, so we know that we need X, Y, and Z done.
And that's a player coach, if you ask me.
That's awesome.
That's 100% a player coach.
I think more and more people are like that.
The experience you and I had, Dan, was with the Freeze hockey team and how great those coaches were with us, like the U16.
Yeah, they were great.
team coach. I mean, they went to nationals and won a game. Became the first U16 team from Maryland to win a game at nationals because their coach would come to us and be like, "Hey, what should we do at practice today? Like, what should we work on at practice? What did you mess with them with in training? What did you have them do? Where do you see weaknesses? What do we need to work on in practice?
In an ideal world, a young athlete has communication across the board. Coaches, parents, and trainers are all medical professionals, all communicating with each other to find out what is best for that young athlete, right? That's a perfect world, and I know that's tough a lot of times, but sometimes it's not really that difficult.
No.
You know? And it really is a young person's quality of life that's at stake there.
Yeah.
So,
and we got to see what that looks like actualized. Not a lot of people do. We got to see what that looks like actualized, which is champions all through all grade levels,
right,
with our hockey kids.
Results should trump egos in that all the time. So a trainer can't just be like, well, I know that this is better, so this is what I'm going to do with them without talking to anybody. That's not fair. It's not fair for a coach to take them through whatever and never ever know what they're doing training-wise and never really tell the parents what's going on. And then you have a parent that just takes their kid to training and to the games, just drops them off, picks them up, no questions, right? Not even worried about what is going on and like who they're talking to or what their son or daughter is doing in practice or in training. Like that to me is just egos, or sometimes in a way little neglectful as well. So I
and then they wonder why the kid doesn't play.
Right. Or they get hurt, or they don't want to play the sport anymore. There's just a million things at work there. Take me through another thing, Josh. If we're going in season versus off season, let's talk about it at a really high level. All right, so at a college, at a professional level, what does in season versus off season versus directly out of season? What are the differences there? What do those things? Paint me a picture of that.
See, this is where it gets fun, because you're talking about, if you're a college kid, that strength conditioning coach is looking at a 4-year plan, right?
Right.
Especially you have kids redshirt, things like that. You want a kid to change a certain way, whether that's gain weight, lose weight. Then it becomes a little bit more sport specific. In the case of, I'll use swimming, for example. In college swimming, they're building up to a very short amount of time of championships. Like, their regular season meets don't mean that much. It's all about championships. So the entire season is progressive overload with the thought of peaking when championships come around.
Explain peaking to our listeners real quick, because this is another thing that drives me nuts is people not really thinking about what the athlete is trying to accomplish, whether it's a game or a tournament or a championship or a meet or something like that.
So peaking is this beautiful thing where recovery and performance and work all come together for your highest level of athleticism. Right. So during the season, you're usually a little beaten down. I'll go back to the swimming example. You're beaten down. You've been training a ton. You're doing a ton of laps in the pool. You're in the weight room. And then right when championships come around, those conditioning sessions get a little less. Weight room gets a little bit more power focused, a little less on the rep side. And that kid's able to recover to that muscle breakdown that they have.
So
and for a short window. What was that?
Keep going. You're hitting it right now.
For that short window, they have the absolute top level of their peak performance, whatever that was built to.
Right. That is so important, I think, in really training anybody, correct?
Yeah,
I mean, because
absolutely.
even if I have like a middle school or a high school basketball player and they have a tournament on Saturday and they have like 3 games, then if I have them that Thursday or Friday, I can't just put them through a heinous conditioning workout and have them tired for those games, right? And certainly as I start to get into college and a professional level, that is like, I mean, you should be fired at that point for doing something like that, because then the person has a higher chance of to risk injury. And then they're just not going to play as well, right?
Yeah. So you get a kid who has worked really hard, is built to this point. You need to facilitate that. Your job as a trainer is to facilitate that. Your job is not to do what your own ego says you need to do.
There's the ego thing again.
So say that kid comes to you, you have this big workout planned, and this happens all the time with baseball. So I'll use baseball as an example. I'll have a high school baseball player come up to me and say, hey, I have a showcase this weekend that I'm going to, and I'm flying across the country for. What can you do to get me ready? Right, that's a big thing with high school baseball is you're going to showcases all over the place trying to get recruited or drafted. Right, so how do you just at the drop of a hat say that you had no idea this was coming? Hey, I got to train this kid for this. And so that's where the tricky part comes in with that kind of stuff. Thankfully, that's usually more in the off season. In season doesn't usually happen where you get stuff that gets thrown at you. You tend to know the schedule of games and things like that.
Which you 100% should know. Don't just start training athletes and don't know anything about their schedule, especially when it's already documented, right? And already planned out.
I mean, you should be getting your kid's schedule off the internet.
But then you have people that are training
exactly
people
when they're playing.
Yeah, drives me crazy.
You should know exactly when that kid has games. Again, stuff comes up. They're kids, but you need to have a pretty good idea of when their championship season is, when they have showcases, things like that. Like that needs to be a point of communication. Again, stuff pops up, but you need to try to be in control of that as much as you can.
Mr. Hillman, Mr. Kruhm, let me try to sum this up real quick.
Yes,
Tell me if I've missed anything. You need to understand what your athlete is training for. So when their games are, what meets they're training for, what is important in their given season, what's important for their life. You need to understand those things. You also need to be able to get feedback. How much are they doing in practices? How much are they doing sometimes in their hobbies or at school or whatever? Your main job as a trainer is you have two main things that you're working on. One, you want that player to be available and to prevent injury, right? And then you also want whatever you're doing to translate to the field. Whatever they do in the weight room is great, but it all should transfer right to their field or the rink or the field, or I said field and rink and ice and
we got you.
Thank you.
We're following.
Man, Lord, I'm all
here.
over the place right now. Yeah, so it should translate to their sport is really what I'm trying to say. You should also know exactly what you're working on. Know the difference between training for true speed versus footwork versus change of direction versus agility versus strength, right, or conditioning. And then you should know when you're looking at an athlete from a general physical preparedness point of view versus when you start to get more advanced and more sports specific. Gentlemen, did I leave anything out?
I got something.
No, I mean, I just like to add, like, it's not about you, it's about them. Right? They're
so
the
you
athlete.
should leave your ego out of it.
So that's what I was going to say. Don't be a douche. Take the ego out of it, okay? Worry about the athlete, how to improve their life and their sport. That's your job.
Yeah,
100%.
they're the athlete.
Yeah.
They're the athlete. If they get a scholarship, it's not because of you, it's because of them.
Yeah.
Right?
They're not their agent.
You're facilitating, you're giving them the keys, but that's the Ferrari, right?
Exactly. I think that's a great point. Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure as always. Josh, thank you so much for calling in. I know you got a sick kid and wife at home. Again, you're a hero. I hope they all feel better.
We're so proud of you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh, man, absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been another version of The Lab.